Today I'd like to talk about the model of communication. If you look in your textbook, you'll see the model, and I've lectured for many introductory speech classes, and almost always there is a model of communication that involves at least a sender and a receiver. If it's interpersonal communication, it's one sender and one receiver. There's a message that goes this way, speaker, listener, then it turns around, speaker, listener, and one of the points they make is that this is a process of communication, and it goes back and forth. If it's mass communication, the model's a little different. I record a TV message or a radio message and I send it out to my audience. I don't see how they respond. I don't get any immediate feedback. Public speaking is somewhere in between those two. We have a larger audience, and generally we don't have a direct dialogue with our audience, but we do get some feedback and some communication. Maybe one person will ask a question, another person looks confused, so I realize I need to explain a little more. Somebody else falls asleep, so I need to pick up the pace. I need to change my media, perhaps. Use PowerPoint, something like that. For our purposes, we're going to talk about a simple message and how does it get received in an audience. So this person has an idea, and we generally call this idea, this image, a star. We have a word for it. In my filter, I have the dictionary of the English language, so I can encode star and say that word and send it to my audience. And I'll send it over a channel, a spoken channel or an oral channel, so I say the word and they hear it, and my audience hears the same message. So they decode it and think the exact same thing, correct? Not usually. This is a very simple concept. So maybe the first person hears it, and in their filter, they have being a member of the Jewish culture. So they think of the star, but their image of a star is slightly different. It's a Star of David, which has 6 points instead of 5. Maybe this person, it's August. I just took down my Christmas tree, so it had a star on top. Is that what you're talking about? Because in their filter, they have that experience from the other day, or from recently. Maybe one of these people watched the movie Under the Stars the other day, which was Jumanji, The Next Level, and they're thinking, Dwayne Johnson is my favorite movie star. Is that who you're talking about? And so this person might ask a question. You mean Dwayne Johnson? And this person might be confused, have that confused look on their face. Why are you talking about a Christmas tree? So I feel the need to either explain further, or perhaps I will access a different channel, a visual channel, and draw a picture. And then we have multimedia. Some people think, well, I've got to put it on PowerPoint, be multimedia, original, old school media right here. So I send out a message on a different channel, hopefully to clarify. If we're talking to someone from China who didn't speak English, I don't have Chinese in my filter, so I could not encode this message where they could understand it, but I could encode it by drawing it, perhaps, in a way that they would understand it and get the message across by changing channels to adapt. And through all of this, we have noise, and noise tries to get a message to bounce off and come back. Noise keeps it from being effective or getting to its target audience. It can be internal noise or external noise. So if I go into the lecture hall and I sit on the back row and I sit behind somebody or beside somebody that's wearing headphones and they're listening to music, and the music's very loud, and it's louder than the speaker who's way up front, then That is external noise. It's preventing me from getting the message. If I identify this is a barrier to listening or to communication, I can try to overcome that barrier. Perhaps I can ask, would you turn down your music? Or I could get up and move closer to the front where that's no longer a barrier. Could be internal noise. I have a 12:30 class and I always show up to class hungry and I can't focus on the lecture because I'm thinking about lunch. So I decide to prevent this barrier. I'll bring a snack to have right before class that will help me not be distracted. And all of this takes place in a context. And context has rules and expectations, sometimes involves a physical setting. So in this class, we started off, the first assignment was to tell a joke. You don't normally tell a joke in a biology class because those are not the rules. You wouldn't tell a joke in the library. The expectation in the library is that you have to be quiet. You don't go to church and stand up and tell a joke because you're supposed to be quiet there and there's a guy up front who's already speaking. It would be rude to interrupt him. We understand the rules of the context and we try to operate within those. Now sometimes we don't. Sometimes I'll tell a story of going to a church in Romania in '92 with a friend, and he called it his church. I want to show you my church. Well, and by that he meant this is the church near my home, not a church where he attended, where he knew people, where he knew the context and the rules. So the idea of church, I actually understand the context better than he did at the time. This was shortly after communism. Communism had really suppressed churches and the idea of church attendance. And so that's not part of many of their context at that time. So we walk into the church, and it's a very old church, and the government has preserved it, or not torn it down, because of its historical significance. And so he walks in, and he's saying, hey, you've got to see this statue. It's very old. It's from the 13th century. And look at this painting. It's gold leaf, and it's very important, and it has significance. And my wife and I are there, and we understand the context, and there are people up front, and they're in robes, and one of them has incense, and they're talking in hushed tones, and by the cues, the nonverbal and the context, I think they're having mass, or they're having church, and the rules are, you should be quiet. My friend doesn't have that in his understanding of the context. So finally, one of the monks comes over. I'm not Romanian Orthodox. I don't have Romanian in my filter, so I can't understand exactly what he's saying, but I do pick up the nonverbal, and I think he's saying, we're trying to have church, you need to be quiet. And my friend looked at us and says, oh, I was just showing my friends from the United States around the church. Well, at that time, tourism was very low. Not a lot of people from the United States had come there, and so we were kind of unusual. And so he liked the idea of showing his church off, and so he turns to us and says, hey, you got to see this statue. It's very old. It's from the 13th century, and this picture has gold leaf on it, and it's very important. One of the points I want to make out of that is he understood the context and the rules. It was his job to enforce the rules. He had come to enforce the rules of communication in this context, but because he had that authority, he could also break the rules. So if you go into the library and Neva Parrott wants to tell you a joke, she has the authority to do that. She can break those rules. So understanding the context in which all this takes place is important. And this becomes important for other things in the chapter. So we'll talk about audience analysis, situation analysis, communication, apprehension, and listening. And all that will come in the next lecture.